Hey, book lovers, and welcome back to Lit Snippets. We are diving into Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Message today.
Ooh, this one is dense.
It's a really thought-provoking read, and
Yeah.
I was struck by that opening image of
Oh,
his
yeah.
dad, engrossed in a book.
Right. Just that sketch that his mom had done.
Yeah, it's like this really powerful symbol of resilience, like seeking refuge in knowledge even amidst hardship.
It is, and it kind of sets the stage for Coates' whole journey in this book, too.
It does. So he takes us from this, personal reflection to this long-deferred trip to Dakar, Senegal.
Yeah, which is like a homecoming in a way, right? Like a reckoning with his ancestral
Yeah,
roots.
exactly. And he doesn't sugarcoat it either.
Oh, no.
Like, he talks about feeling this mix of joy and dread and hope all at the same time.
Yeah, and then he drops this term, niggerology.
Yeah, that one kinda hits you in the gut.
It does. It's his way of describing, these racist ideologies that have shaped perceptions of blackness globally.
And what's really unsettling is that he sees this playing out even in Africa.
Right? Like it shatters this myth that going back to the motherland would be this escape from racism.
It's like racism is so deeply ingrained in our global consciousness that it's seeped into every corner of the world.
And he traces it back, to 19th century scientific racism.
Oh, yeah, those horrific theories about black inferiority.
And he shows how those ideas, you know, they haven't disappeared. They're still present in modern media.
Absolutely. And then he brings it to education.
Yeah, he challenges that banking system of education.
Where it's all about rote memorization and standardized tests.
And he's speaking from experience here, right? He talks about his own struggles with that system.
Totally. And he advocates for a more experiential approach.
Critical thinking, fostering genuine curiosity.
It makes you wonder how many brilliant minds have been stifled by that rigid system.
So many. And then there's this powerful thread about storytelling
Yes, he talks about teaching writing in a prison.
and leading workshops for young Black women.
It's like he's showing how sharing personal narratives can break down barriers and build empathy.
It reminds me of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story.
Totally. Like, we need to hear multiple perspectives to challenge the dominant narratives.
And speaking of which, there's a pretty significant shift when Coates goes to the Palestine Festival of Literature.
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting. He's exposed to a whole new layer of oppression and injustice.
Exactly. And he starts drawing parallels between the language used to justify oppression in America and in Israel.
It's like he's connecting the dots between these seemingly disparate struggles,
And then he takes on this concept of Israel as a Jewish democracy
which he sees as fundamentally contradictory.
because it relies on the disenfranchisement of Palestinians.
It's a bold critique, and he doesn't shy away from it.
Oh no, he dives right into the history of Zionism.
And how colonialism has shaped its ideology.
It's like he's pulling back the curtain on a narrative that many people accept without question.
And that questioning is so important.
It is. And then he revisits his own work on reparations.
You mean the case for reparations?
Yeah, he initially used the Holocaust and German reparations as a framework.
Right.
But here in the message, he acknowledges the limitations of that comparison.
Like, it's not a one-to-one analogy.
Exactly. The struggle for reparations for Black Americans needs to be understood within its own specific historical context.
Which is what makes his journey to Deir Yassin so powerful.
The site of that 1948 massacre of Palestinians.
Yeah, he's confronting the reality of their suffering.
And he's centering their voices in telling their own story.
It's a sobering reminder that history is often written by the victors.
And that we need to be critical of the narratives we've been given.
So as we move forward with the message,
Yeah.
I think the question we need to ask ourselves
Because
is
whose stories are we missing?
exactly,
Hmm.
and what can we do to amplify those voices?
It's a good place to start.
It is.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is how Coates kind of grapples with his own evolution as a writer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about how he used to be so focused on dismantling white supremacy within America
Right.
that he overlooked the global scale of oppression.
Yeah, it's like he was so focused on exposing the lies in his own backyard
Exactly.
that he missed the bigger picture,
And he even admits to some of his own blind spots.
like with the case for reparations.
Exactly. He talks about how he initially relied on the Holocaust and German reparations as a framework,
Uh-huh.
but now he's recognizing the limitations of that comparison.
So he's saying we can't just apply the Holocaust model to every situation.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Every struggle needs to be understood on its own terms.
And his experiences in Palestine really highlight that.
It's interesting because he talks about learning from Palestinian writers
Right.
who were inspired by figures like James Baldwin and Angela Davis,
Wow, yeah.
and it shows how those voices resonated across borders.
But at the same time, Coates realizes that as an outsider,
Yeah.
he can only offer a limited perspective.
It's like he's acknowledging his own positionality
Exactly. He's advocating for listening to the voices of those directly affected.
without centering his own interpretation.
And that's what makes his visit to Deir so powerful.
Oh man, that's a heavy one.
It is. He's not just visiting a historical site,
Yeah.
he's bearing witness to the stories of the survivors.
Like that man who recounts fleeing with his sisters during the massacre.
It's heartbreaking.
And it forces us to confront the reality of Palestinian suffering.
And, we talked about Niggerology earlier.
Yeah.
Well, Coates sees a similar kind of dehumanization happening with Palestinians.
Oh, how so?
They're often portrayed as backward or uncivilized.
Oh, classic colonial trope.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
way to justify their dispossession,
And he even connects this to the concept of Jewish democracy,
which he argues is inherently contradictory.
because it relies on the disenfranchisement of another people.
It's a really sharp critique.
And it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the situation.
And you know what I really admire about Coates?
What's that?
His willingness to examine his own biases.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't shy away from that.
Yeah. He admits that he initially had a very limited understanding of reparations,
Mm.
but his journey to Palestine forced him to expand his perspective.
It's like he's constantly learning and unlearning.
And it's inspiring to see that kind of intellectual honesty.
Absolutely. So what do you think is the main takeaway here for listeners?
I think it's about challenging the narratives we've been given,
And seeking out different perspectives?
especially from those who have been marginalized.
It's about being willing to have our worldview shaken up.
And using that newfound understanding to fight for justice.
It's a tall order, but someone's got to do it.
Right.
It's about reclaiming the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Like giving voice to those who have been silenced.
Exactly. And Coates draws this really interesting contrast
Okay.
between the kind of curated narrative you get at places like the City of David,
Oh, yeah, I read about that.
which is like this very polished presentation of history.
Yeah, very carefully constructed.
And then he juxtaposes that with the stories of Palestinians who have actually experienced dispossession firsthand.
So it's like challenging that official version of history.
Right. It's about seeking out those alternative narratives, those voices that are often marginalized.
And that's where literature comes in, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a powerful tool for giving voice to the voiceless.
For challenging those dominant narratives.
And for fostering empathy and understanding.
You know, thinking about Coates' journeys to Senegal and Palestine, it really strikes me how much emphasis he puts on personal experience.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about reading about these issues.
Right.
It's about being present, witnessing them firsthand.
It's about that embodied knowledge.
Exactly. And he even admits that he had to unlearn some of his own preconceived notions
Hmm.
to really see the world through the eyes of others.
It's a humbling process.
It is.
Mm.
And I think that's what makes the message so powerful.
I agree.
It's not just an intellectual exercise.
Oh.
It's a personal journey of growth and transformation.
It's about challenging ourselves to be more open, more aware.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the message, what do you think is the key takeaway for listeners?
I think it's a call to action.
Ooh, I like that.
It's a challenge to be more critical of the narratives we're given,
To seek out diverse perspectives.
to listen to those who have been marginalized,
To be willing to have our own worldview challenged.
and ultimately to use our knowledge and our voices to fight for a more just world.
It's a lot to take in,
It is.
but it's essential work.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up here.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Message.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep those pages turning.
Always.